first annual W.E.B. Du Bois banquet. He also received an award from the Washington University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences Fellowship. Dr. Darkwa is presently the president of the Ghana Technology University College and also the traditional ruler of the Patrinsa traditional area in the Asante Achim district. Nana Osei Darkwa II, as he is known, was installed in 2014. So can we put our hands together as we welcome Nana Osei Darkwa and his presenters? Thank you.
Well, thanks for the elaborate introduction. Fortunately, there's no chairman here to fine you for torturing the name of my community, but that's tolerated. I know the afternoon sessions are always tough. We've just come back from lunch and all that, but this is a very, very interesting session. We're going to talk about, telecom reform, regulators, and all that. And, we have two distinguished speakers with us to do justice to the topic. Let me give a brief background. As we know, telecommunication markets in Africa and other parts of the world have witnessed dramatic changes since the early 1990s. This has been influenced in part by changes in telecommunication technology, poor performance by incumbent telecom operators, and structural adjustment policies imposed on countries by multilateral agencies. Most African countries inherited telecommunication systems from their former colonial masters that were not in the best of shape. After the attainment of political independence in the late 1950s and early 1960s, a number of African countries undertook measures to expand and transform their telecommunication sectors. And many African countries are at various stages in the reform process. These countries see telecom reform as a way to transform their debilitated communication infrastructures and integrate their countries into the global economic system. Major reform strategies have included liberalization of telecom services, total or partial privatization of the incumbent fixed line operator, licensing of new mobile operators, and establishment of an independent regulator to implement policy and to mediate when there's conflict among telecom providers. The outcome of these measures have been mixed. We know telecom regulation is critical in any reform. The independence of the national regulator is perceived as the most important element that, in effect, determines how other functions with the regulation aspect are carried out. Regulatory authorities are now operational in many African countries and can be applauded for their efforts to get to this stage, given history where regulatory authorities were merely an extension of the government ministries they were supposed to regulate. Today, we see some aspects of independence. With an independent regulator in place, then certain basic regulatory functions are expected to be implemented by the regulator, the most common among these being price regulation, issuing of appropriate licenses, interconnection, revenue sharing, and tariff management. Generally, they ensure that tariffs are within reasonable limits and that telecom services are distributed fairly in a given country. This afternoon, we have two regulatory bodies, the Nigerian Communications Commission and the National Communication Authority from Ghana. They are here to address this very topic on regulation. Our first speaker is G.T. Mohammed, who is an assistant director with the Nigerian Communications Commission. He has over 12 years' experience in core telecommunications regulation, having joined the Nigerian Communications Commission in 2004. G.T. Mohammed, who was called to the Nigerian bar in 1991, is an astute regulation specialist with extensive experience in private and corporate legal practice. He is presently the head of the Telecommunications Law and Regulation Unit in the Legal and Regulatory Services Department of the Nigerian Communications Commission. With this brief introduction, I have the honor to invite Ms. Sajiti Mohammed to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman of Session. Permit me to bring greetings from Nigeria, from the Nigerian Communications Commission, to wish the NCA well, and to also appreciate the opportunity that has been given to the Nigerian Communications Commission to speak at the symposium to mark the 20th year anniversary of the NCA. I have a presentation that likely is going to be split into two parts. The first part is going to deal with a general overview of the telecoms landscape in Nigeria, something that we may be familiar with. And then it will dovetail into certain issues that the Commission has had to grapple with and certain out-of-the-box solutions that we've had to come up with to address those things. Unfortunately, the best practice as we know it, unfortunately was not able to really address it because there were certain peculiarities that came up in the course of implementation of some of these things. And I hope that we're going to get one or two learning experiences from what we'll be discussing today. Oops. Okay.
Pointer is something.
And this. Maybe you can control it from there. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so like we say, modern communication technologies have definitely defined a new era, and it transformed the world at a very rapid pace. In Nigeria, just giving a quick statistics of what we've experienced with the advent of telecoms and the information communication technology, that in Q3 of 2015, information and communication sector contributed about 9.8% to the national GDP of Nigeria. The interesting thing to note about that is why the other sectors have rather been reducing in their contribution to GDP. Telecoms, information communications technology has rather been increasing, and that's a first for us. Every other sector more or less has been going down except for telecoms. Now, as a regulator, we choose to be guided by certain principles. These are the three principles that guide us in all that we do. We want to be seen as being very fair, we want to be seen as firm, and we also want to be seen as being forthright. Next slide. The Commission is governed by issues, by laws. The Commission also comes up with certain things that dictate the pace or try to see how we can provide kind of like guidance to the industry. The principal law setting up the Commission is the Nigerian Communications Act of 2003. Now, deriving from the NCA, as we call it, we have powers to make subsidiary legislations. And so we've been able to come up with certain regulations and guidelines. And these were basically the tool that we've used to address some of the issues that we'll be discussing later. We also have some business rules, and then we also have the powers to issue directions. Now, in a situation where our existing act, all the regulations and guidelines do not specifically address an issue, the law empowers us to come up with certain directions that will kind of give guidance to the industry on what steps to be taken with regards to a particular thing. The same thing comes to the issue of determinations, that we need to carry out certain studies and then make certain determinations that again will provide guidance and direction. So depending on the issue that we are trying to address, it's what will now give us guidance as regards whether we're going to use a direction or whether we're going to use a determination. Next slide. Now, further to the powers that have been conferred on the Commission, we've come up with certain regulations. This is just a snapshot of some of them. This is not by any means the end. We have the quality of service regulations. We have the Nigerian Communications Enforcement Processes Regulations. We have the Competition Practices Regulations. Now, the Competition Practices Regulation was particular. We had to come up with it because, unfortunately, Nigeria doesn't have a broad competition regulation that covers every aspect of the economy in Nigeria. So, because of the issues that we're facing with regards to telecommunication, we had to come up with something that was sector-specific to address these issues. Then we have the Mobile Number Portability Regulations. We have the Telecoms Network Interconnection Regulations. Then the Registration of Telephone Subscribers Regulations, and then Consumer Code of Practice Regulations. Next slide. Now, with regards to guidelines, our distinction is that for regulations, basically, they have the force of law. Why guidelines basically are just giving direction to the industry. We have a couple of that. We have some guidelines as well. We have guidelines on procedure for granting approval to disconnect telecom operators, and this was very key because we're facing a very major challenge, and we had to come up with this to address it. These are some other guidelines that you have on the flash. Then guidelines for installation of masts and towers. Next slide. Now, these are some key players we have in the telecoms market in Nigeria. The NCC as a regulator, the Ministry of Communication that performs the oversight function over the regulator. One of the things that we want to buttress is the fact that not only in name, but the NCC enjoys a measure of independence based on what the law says. And so this is just pure oversight functions that the ministry has over the commission. Instances have been where the ministry has tried to overstep its bound to go beyond the oversight functions, and the courts in Nigeria have declared that the independence of the regulator must be maintained and protected. These are major operators that we have in the country. Mobile network operators, MTN, with about 39% of the market share. We have Glo, Airtel, Etisalat. Next slide. These are other players. Let's not waste so much time on this. Next slide, please. Now, coming to the issues that the Commission was faced with and had to come up with some specific solutions to. The first issue we had was the matter of interconnection. I beg to also say that it's actually specifically about disputes with regards to issue of non-payment of interconnect obligations. We've had occasions where we've met at international fora like this, and we raised the issue of interconnect indebtedness, and nobody had an idea what we're talking about. Because expectedly, interconnect obligations are supposed to be like the first line of charge. So it shouldn't be that anybody will owe it. But we had a peculiar situation back home in Nigeria where people were owing, and at an instant, somebody was owing about $75 million interconnect obligation. And so you'll be wondering, the person that is being owed, how do you even get the money to be able to roll out and expand your network to be able to address the quality of service issues that we're facing at the time? So the Commission came up with the Telecommunications Interconnection Regulation that spells out the details on what is expected to be done with regards to issues of interconnection. The law does not allow that an operator should unilaterally disconnect another operator on reasons of interconnect indebtedness. But it was becoming such a huge problem that we had to find a way of addressing it. And so the Commission came up with what is called the disconnection guidelines. It's not really meant to only address issues of disconnections for purposes of interconnect indebtedness, but that was like the main thing that we're seeking to address. Then the next issue we had is the registration of telephone subscribers regulations. We had a challenge back home where the telecom network was being used for purposes of crime and terrorism, and it was a big thing. The challenge was lines were not being registered in Nigeria. People could pick up SIM cards off the street and they're ready to go. But this presented some security challenges. So in order to do this, we came up with regulations on registration of telephone subscribers. Now the whole essence is, as much as possible, ensure that every person who comes to pick up a SIM must have certain details, biometrics and other details that will be there for purposes of investigations in the event that such a line is used for the commission of crime. Recently, we had occasion to sanction one of our operators. It was quite huge. I think about $5.2 billion that we sanctioned for purpose of non-compliance with provisions of this regulation. And the reason being that the agents that the operator was using for purpose of registration did not capture the biometrics the way it was meant to be. So when investigations were going on, you find out that a picture that ought to be of the person who's a subscriber will be a picture of a flower. So we had to take these steps to ensure that the operators were sanctioned. Now, another challenge we had was a legacy issue of infrastructure. The NITA was the incumbent. NITA didn't have sufficient infrastructure. Now, when the commission licensed operators in 2001, they were faced with some of these challenges. And added to that, we had incidents of vandalism of ICT infrastructure. For whatever reason, some were because of accidents, some were because of construction, some were because of deliberate acts. Now, how do you go addressing this? Because we know what it means. If there's a fiber cut and there is no redundancy, the challenges that the operators are going to face in trying to provide service in certain areas is going to be very difficult. We have some extant regulations, we have laws that were aimed at trying to address some of these things, but unfortunately they were not sufficient. So the Commission at the moment is working on something that is very novel and innovative. We've partnered with the National Assembly, and then we've also taken along the Ministry of Communication and the Ministry of Justice, and we've developed a critical national ICT infrastructure bill. Now, what is this supposed to be? It's basically to designate ICT infrastructure in Nigeria as critical national infrastructure, with a view that government will now take responsibility for protecting such infrastructure. So in the event anybody tampers with it, the prosecution will be at the instance of government. So the operators will not need to spend or waste resources going after such. Neither will the regulator also be responsible for going after such people who do the destruction. Next slide. Now, a few regulatory milestones that have also gone towards addressing some of the key challenges that we've experienced in time past. Like I mentioned in the last slide, the issue of infrastructure was such a major issue for us. So one of the things we now found was that, yes, NITA didn't perform, and we had some gap we had to address. So the Commission has come up with something called the B-Train. B-Train is Backbone Transmission Infrastructure Project. It is resident in the Universal Service Provision Fund that is anchored in the Nigerian Communications Commission. What we do is to provide subsidy to the operators to encourage them to roll out backbone transmission infrastructure. And this has really helped. As at the last count, the rollout of this infrastructure. Now, the next thing we are also looking at doing, and we've reached quite an advanced stage, is with regards to the licensing of what we call the infrastructure companies, the infracos. Now, like I said, infrastructure, basic problem, no transmission facilities. How do you address it? How do you now use that to be able to encourage or boost broadband penetration? So we've split up the country into about 7 regions. And what we've done is to license specific infracos to provide that infrastructure for those regions, with a view that if we have those people licensed there, you don't need to come again and insist on digging to lay the same infrastructure. It's already there. So you work towards trying to see how you can lease it and provide it. So we went through a beauty contest. We've gotten the infraco for Lagos and the North Central region of Nigeria. We are working at trying to license the remaining 5 for the other regions. And we hope that this is going to be huge for us, because one of the things that we're really laying emphasis on is the issue of broadband. And with these infracos coming on board, that's going to help do that. Next slide. Then another issue we had, when we were implementing, when the telecom operators came on board, we never really had so much experience with a lot of disturbing SMS and calls that usually the value-added service operators will use the networks to be able to reach out to consumers. Now, suddenly it became a huge issue for us. So what did you do? We've insisted on coming up with what we call a do not disturb database. And we've thrown across, and it just kickstarted on the 1st of July. So what we've done is we have a short code, the 2442 number, that consumers can call into and place themselves on a do not disturb database, so that all the calls that come at the ungodly hours of the day will be restricted, because none of them will now be allowed to make the call to you. Then we also have guidelines on SIM replacement. Again, it's a peculiar situation that we have in our country, where you find you have a SIM, and your SIM, somebody can go and have it reported as stolen. And once it is declared as stolen, they'll knock it off, and some other person, then the same SIM will now be given to this person. It's usually based on insider information. So somebody comes, gets your SIM, all your data is on it, all your contact details are on it. And then maybe within that period, there is a transaction at the bank. And then you have somebody call that number and confirms that yes, I'm the owner of this line, and have asked that the withdrawal should be done. So it was becoming an issue, and so we came up with these guidelines on SIM replacement to make it more stringent and difficult for people to go and get another line, to get your number given to them under the guise that they have misplaced it. It's been very successful. So we've knocked out almost like 90% of the incidents that we've had on this. Next slide. I'll just conclude on this. That we realize that we are faced with a major paradox, so to say. We are caught between the government, we are caught between the operators, and then the consumers. How do you go about trying to come up with policies, come up with certain decisions that will both ensure that at every given point in time, the telecoms industry has contributed so much to the GDP of Nigeria. So it's not something that we choose to trifle with. So we've recognized the peculiar position that we occupy. And we're just working towards ensuring that there is an enabling environment for investors and all players in the telecoms market in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your brilliant presentation. We would invite the second speaker, Mr. Peter Darkwa, who holds a BSc in Electrical and Electronic Engineering from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and a postgraduate diploma in Telecom Management Studies. He also holds several diplomas in IMT Mobile Broadband Technologies, Equipment Authorization, Broadcast Transmitter Operation and Maintenance, Spectrum Management, Radio Administration, and Satellite Communications. He has been with the NCA since 2008 and has worked with the Regulatory Administration and Engineering divisions on several projects. He's currently a deputy manager with the Engineering division and serves on the Digital Migration and Television White Space Technology projects of the NCA. Welcome, Mr. Darkwa.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So my presentation is going to be on the television white space project that the NCA is currently undertaking. And so I will first of all start by looking at the current trends in the communications industry in Ghana, and then we'll look at the spectrum crunch, after which we'll look at various spectrum allocation strategies that we use to assign frequencies to services. And then we'll look at some broadband initiatives that have been undertaken in the country, from where we move to the current analog to digital terrestrial television migration and its ramifications on the broadcast and data industries, from which we'll move to look at the characteristics of the TV UHF band, and then we'll look at the use of that band for data deployment. After which we'll look at TV white space trials that have been undertaken in the country, and then we'll look at the regulatory process that the NCA is undertaken to have it formally licensed in the country. Then we'll look at the public consultations which are ongoing now. So currently, communications in the whole world are going digital. So when I was in the university, we were learning about analog communications in those days, where they tell you that with all the complex mathematics that we're doing around them, I can see my moderator smiling. All the engineering maths we have to learn on analog communications. But now, most of the communications in the world is moving digital. And we've seen the advantages of digital communications. It's easier to process. It is better to propagate around and all that. And so most communications in the world are moving digital. And so you see a lot of technologies being phased out, most of the old analog technologies being phased out and being replaced by digital technologies. And in Ghana too, there is a lot of hullabaloo about digital migration. So we are migrating our TV services from analog to digital. So this is part of the digital migration that is going on all over the world. And also we are seeing an exponential growth in data all over. Our colleagues from the telcos were telling us that now data is actually increasing on their networks. One colleague from Australia said that data accounts for about 99% of traffic on networks. So we've seen a lot of data traffic going all over on our networks. And this have implications on the spectrum allocation. Yeah, so okay, next slide. Yeah. No, up one. Yeah. So one up. Yeah. So this graph here shows the effect that the demand in data has on the spectrum. And so we can see that as the data traffic increases on a network, it begins to stress the spectrum that's allocated for that service. And so as more and more data traffic increases, it gets to a point where the spectrum becomes congested and then the spectrum demand becomes negative, at which point we'll have to go back and look at the allocations we've made and see how we can accommodate more people on that same stretch of spectrum. And so as the demand in data increases, after we allocate all the spectrum and it gets used up, we'll have to go back now and look at what we've already assigned and see ways of using that to meet the demand. Next. No. Up. Up. No. Down. Down. Use this so I can move. So the graph here shows the backbone infrastructure that we have here to support the data demand. And so on the left here, we'll see a lot of undersea cables landing on the shores of Ghana. And in the middle there, we'll see the combined fiber deployments of the telcos in the country. And so you can see that there is a lot of undersea cables landing on our shores. And there is a lot of fiber cables going mostly on the eastern corridor and on the southern belt. And the last map there shows the fiber network of NITA, which is mainly on the eastern corridor. And so if you combine all these networks, you realize that we have a very extensive fiber deployment in the country. And so the backbone infrastructure to support the data demand is in place. So what do we have to do as a country to meet the demand that data is having on our networks? Now, all over the world, there are 4 main modalities that we use in allocating spectrum. So we have licensed spectrum and we have unlicensed spectrum. Now, when you come to licensed spectrum, we have exclusive spectrum licensing where when we give a spectrum block to an operator, only that operator has access to that spectrum. And so no other operator in that area uses it. And we see that mainly in the analog TV and mobile cellular network space. And then we also have license shared, where the spectrum is given, the same spectrum is given to about 4 or 5 operators. And then we bring them to a table, and then they plan how they use it so that they don't interfere on each other. So in the same area, they can decide that maybe in Accra, I'll deploy along this line, you deploy along this line. And for those who also are deploying the same space, which polarization they will use to avoid interference on themselves. So for in license spectrum, we have license exclusive and then license shared. And for unlicensed spectrum too, we have and license exclusive. So where we allocate the whole band, and then we make it exclusive. So anybody can pick that spectrum and use it, and then agree to accept interference from whoever is there. And that is used mainly in the Wi-Fi 2.4 and 5.4 gigahertz bands. And then we also have a license shared. So this is where you don't license people to use the spectrum, but then they agree to share it. So although they are not licensed, they agree among themselves on ways in which to share that spectrum. And then this is one model being looked out for in the TV white space space. Now, the interesting thing about these modalities is that both licensed spectrum and unlicensed spectrum have been highly successful. So if you pick the license exclusive, which is used by the telcos, it has resulted in a very wide deployment of mobile and data networks all over the country. If you also look at the unlicensed spectrum, if you look at Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi is a very dominant technology that we use to access data in our homes and in our offices. And so one cannot say which approach is the best. Both approaches are successful. And so we have to look at ways in which to use both approaches to the best use possible. Go down. Now, in Ghana, the government has over the years initiated a lot of projects to push broadband deployment in the country. And there is this economic argument that for every, as you push broadband penetration, the GDP also grows. And so it's in the interest of the country to push broadband to every home so that the economic benefits of broadband deployment can be realized. And so from 1994 to 2000, there was the Accelerated Development Plan, which was aimed at liberalizing the telecom space. And so this plan led to the establishment of the NCA and the privatization of Ghana Telecom in 1996. Let's do that. Go back. Yeah. And then after the privatization of Ghana Telecom, the NCA awarded 2G licenses to four mobile companies in 2004. And then in 2008, we awarded a state mobile license, and then we awarded 3G licenses. And then from 2008 to 2010, we awarded the broadband wireless access licenses for the deployment of 4G networks in the 2.5 gigahertz band. And then just this year, we awarded the first 4G license to a telco, which was MTN, this year. And then currently, we are working on the TV space regulations. And so if you look at this slide, you realize that there have been a multi-pronged approach to broadband deployment in the country. So instead of using one cap fit, or we are trying various techniques that we can use to push the broadband deployment on various fronts. Next slide. Yeah. So the map here shows the deployment of analog TV transmitters in the country. And we can see that the transmitters are scattered all over the country. The chart on the right-hand corner, the upper one, shows the network occupancy of analog and digital TV services in the TV band. And then the chart in the bottom here shows what the band will be like when the analog transmissions go off. And we realize that when the analog transmissions go off, there will be a lot of gaps in the TV band. And so the main aim of the TV space project is to deploy data networks in the unused channels in the TV band. And so the white spaces that name we use is mainly for the unused channels in the TV band, which will become available when the analog TV services are phased off. And so this migration prevents an opportunity for us to get additional spectrum to deploy data networks in the country. Now, there's a lot of enthusiasm about TV space all over the world. And it's because of the peculiar desirability of the TV band for data network deployment. Now, the chart on our left is a comparison between the 450 megahertz band and 900 megahertz band. And we realized that when it comes to propagation, the 450 megahertz band goes further than the 900 megahertz band. So, so assuming the 900 megahertz band will go up to about 4 kilometers, the 450 megahertz band can go up to about 15 kilometers. And so the sizes of the cells are larger. Also, we realized that the 450 megahertz band is able to penetrate buildings better than the 900 megahertz band. And so propagation-wise, it's easier to deploy in very packed urban areas using the 450 megahertz band and the 900 megahertz band. Also, because of the larger cell sizes of the 450 megahertz band, it is cheaper to deploy data networks in the 450 band than the 900 band. And so the 450 band is more attractive for data deployment than the 900 megahertz band being used by the telcos. Next slide. Yeah, this map shows the TV white space trials that are ongoing all over the world. And we can see deployments in the US, in South America, in Brazil, in the UK, in Ghana, in Kenya, Tanzania, Botswana, South Africa, and if you go to Asia too, there are trials in Singapore. So there's a lot of interest in the TV space technology. Several countries are all trying to see best ways in which they can actually deploy data networks in the TV band. Now, so here in Ghana, we started our interest in the TV white space began in 2013. That was 3 years ago, in July. When we worked with Google to map and used and to do a map of TV white space Spectra usage in the country. That was in July 2013. After that exercise, the TV white space team was formed in-house in the NCA to actually have a look at the TV white space and see how we can actually have it here in Ghana. And so in December 2014, the NCA licensed a company called Spectra Wireless to run a TV white space trials and report the findings to the NCA. And so in February 2014, the first TV white space trial was launched at the La Palm Royal Beach Hotel and was used to provide internet access during the DSA spectrum that was held in Ghana in that year. And during that trial, we took our monitoring vans there, we did our occupancies, and then saw how the TV white space network was interacting with licensed TV services in the TV band. And we realized that TV white space technology was actually very good. The data rates were very good. And then we realized they could coexist with the TV service without any cross interference between them. So after the first trial at La Palm in 2014, the company also deployed another TV white space network at the Moderator Entrepreneurial School of Technology. And at that trial, they used the TV white space technology to deploy internet on the campus there. And then the team went there to do a measurement. And we also realized that the throughputs there at the time we were able to realize 10 megabits per second download speed, which was quite good for a network. And then in January 2015, the company deployed a very extensive TV white space network in Koforidua. Most of the deployments there were at the Koforidua Polytechnic campus and at the campus of my director of engineering's former school, Koforidua SecTech. Yeah. So the team also drove there to have a look at the network and see, how the technology was used to deploy the network. Next slide. Yeah. So the map on the left here shows the network trials in Accra. So the company got the internet access from Main 1, cable landing site at Teshi. And then there was a base station there. And then, so the base station then used the TV white space radio link from the cable landing site at Teshi to the MES campus. And then at the MES campus, they used the Wi-Fi 2.4 gigahertz to deploy the network on the campus. So the network was a hybrid of 2.4 gigahertz and TV white space. Also, down there, we see the link from the cable landing site at Teshi to the Labadi Beach Hotel. That was about 5 kilometers. And then they used they used the TUI space link from the cable landing site to the hotel. And then they used the 2.4 gigahertz to deploy the network in the hotel. And there we were able to realize a download speed of 5 megabits per second, which was quite good. On the right here are the TUI space radios that were mounted there. And then down there is the spectrum measurements we took there. Down. Yeah, down. Next slide. Yeah. And then here is the extensive network that they deployed in Koforidua. So the fiber termination point is on the Obotebri mountain. From there, they used a 5 gigahertz link to their main base station at the central CCB building at Koforidua Polytechnic. From there, they deployed the TUI space base station, which was used to supply data to their faculty of engineering building, their Get Fund hostel, and then 3 other private hostels which were around the campus there. So in this particular instance, they used the TUI space as the backhaul, and then at the premises, they used a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi EP to supply the internet. And then when we went there and we did our measurements, we realized download speed of about 10 megabits per second. It was quite good. Down. Yeah, so these are pictures we took of the site. You can see the radios on the buildings, and then some of the APs are down there. Go down. And this is the propagation analysis we did of the network in Koforidua. And we realized that even at the powers they were using, so 0.5 dB microvolt per meter, they were able to cover about 200 kilometers squared. So even at that low power, they were able to cover a very large area and supply data to whatever premise they could serve there. Down. And then the Kofi Annan ICT Center also ran a trial, and they used their trial to supply internet to junior high schools in the Osu area. So they supplied internet to the Ringway Estate Junior High School, and also to the Osu Manhian cluster of schools. So in their case, the base station was on the Kofi Annan campus, and then there were radios at the computer labs of the JHSs, and then they used the Wi-Fi AP to supply internet to the computer lab of the school. When we took our vans there and then we measured the data throughput and we realized that they also got download speeds of about 5 megabits per second. It was quite good. The University of Ghana also ran a trial on their campus. They were looking at they wanted to actually do tests on the TUI space, their TUI space network. So they ran their paths through the forest, through buildings, just to look at how TUI space behaves when there are a lot of obstacles. And we also went there and took our measurements and realized the throughputs were very good there. Next slide. Yeah, so this chart is a roadmap for the TUI space regulatory approval process in Ghana. We are currently doing public consultations, which could be accessed on our website. So if you go on our website, you could have access to the consultation document, and you could also submit your submissions, which began June 27th and will end on the 5th of August. So we could all, from here, go on the NCA website, have a look at the document, read it, and give our comments. And then on the August 9th, there will be a workshop here in Accra to review the comments and then interact with the public. After which, we'll review the submissions received to go through the regulatory approval process, and then by September 12th, we expect to have the regulations published. Yeah, so there's a link to the public consultation document on our website. We could all write it down and then have a look at the document and give our comments. And then at the workshop that we intend to hold on August 9th, we'll have a public consultations conference where we could all attend and give our inputs to the document. And then by September 12th, we'll have the regulations in place. And then we can begin licensing services to use the technology. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. We've listened to the two Gospels, one according to St. Matthew and the other by St. Mark. Now is your turn for us to interact with these two speakers. Your comments, questions, contribution. So you raise your hand if you have a question or comment or contribution, and then they'll bring the mic to you and you make your submission. So the floor is open. Any questions, comments, contributions?
Thank you. Jason Wally from Northern University. I have a question for Peter. I used to work at a university that has a centre for TV white spaces. It launched in 2013, and one of your trials is in Scotland. That trial failed. It is about 2 men and a dog on a hill. It's not scalable, and they've done nothing. And I used to ask them, isn't this engineers in search of doing something? Because we solved the spectrum problem by doing reforming and other mechanisms, and rolling out TV white spaces has proved to be unattractive. So we're still in the trial phase. Are any of your trials actually successful? And I have former doctoral students I'll put in contact with you who have talked to me a lot about this, who work in Africa, who might share some experiences about this in practice. But it just looks to me like engineers with a great idea, but the market has moved on because it is a very dynamic market and we've got other ways to solve the problems you're trying to solve. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, all the trials we ran in Ghana were successful. And in 2014, we actually used the technology to deploy internet during the symposium, and people were able to actually experience it. We were able to, we got a download speed of 10 megabits per second on the network. And so in Ghana here, it's successful. So maybe your students can contact me and then I'll share some of our experiences with them. And as to the point about it's being a bunch of engineers trying to innovate around it, when there's a problem, there should be movement on it. Yeah, and I think instead of trying to, this is one of the ways we are trying to use to solve the data problem. And I think, as I said earlier, there is a multifaceted approach. We are not just using one cap fit all, but we are trying several means, and then see which one works. And in Ghana here, the civil space project team actually works, and then yeah, it works. Yeah.
All right. Any other submission? I see a hand in the back.
My question goes to Peter again. My question is not just about does it work, but is it commercially viable with the onset of 4G technology? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Michael, thank you for your question. Yeah. I think some of the presentations we had yesterday were looking at networks being available, accessible, and affordable. And I think there's a complaint in Ghana here that data is expensive. And if you look at the regulations that we published online, we are trying to treat TY space spectrum as the way we treat unlicensed spectrum, the 2.4 and 4 gigahertz band. We only charge, the fee we charge for commercial use of 2.4 is what we are charging for the TY space. And so we are trying to reduce the spectrum costs, and we hope that that will translate to, cheaper broadband deployment and a cheaper service in the long run. And so I think looking at the commercial side of it, Spectra Wireless is actually working with the TUSP technology, and they are doing well. They're actually expanding their network. So I think it's commercially viable, and I think we should embrace it. Thank you.
All right. There's a hand.
You're getting a bit of heat here. Coming from Asia, I'm aware of the two trials in relation to Singapore and in relation to Indonesia. My understanding is the IDA in Singapore is used it as an interim technology and effectively will walk away from it because it hasn't worked in an urban environment like Singapore. Secondly, in relation to Indonesia, I think the view is that there's a real concern that it could delay the digital dividend in the 700 megahertz in Asia, in that some of the equipment might be effectively marooned as part of that process. The moment you do the digital dividend, you go through the digital television process, you do the refarming of spectrum to move the TV channels below whatever number it is, 698 or whatever the number here is in Ghana, and that people may be, having bought that technology, may end up having to see it junked as part of the process. And on that, there's a view that perhaps the ecosystem will never develop to effectively be as competitive as other mobile technologies because of the scale and other things. So I don't know what your criteria for success here in Ghana, but I suppose what I'd like to mention to you is it would be worthwhile, I think, before you make a final decision, to talk and look at the outcomes of the other trials, because some of the other regulators, I think, would be most willing to share with the NCA in relation to their experience. So it might be very valuable, and it might also be worthwhile to think about, if you do decide to proceed, that you make it a very interim licensing arrangement, because I think what will happen globally is 700 megahertz is probably by next year will be an ecosystem for countries with more than 3 billion people. And I'm expecting after the FCC auctions that the 600 megahertz will soon become another band for LTE, for TD-LTE in the top end. And that will be likely to run through to WRC 19 and other forums. So extending out, what's already occurred for Region 1 ITU of 700 and 800 for LTE. So just some comments so that you're aware of what's happening in some other markets. So maybe you can talk maybe a little bit about your criteria for success.
I don't know if that was a contribution or you want him to respond to the success criteria.
Yeah. Our success criteria is when we license services and they're able to deploy, and we go to test it and it works. So that is our success criteria. And so far, the company that is using the technology is doing well. And so for us, it's successful. Yeah.
Thanks. There's a hand in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Joshua Pepra, an ex-regulator and a friend of the regulator. First of all, let me commend the National Communications Authority for this international symposium that they've put together for us this past couple of days. I also would like to commend the gentleman from NCC, the Nigerian Communications Commission, or you are now authority. Okay, commission, yeah. I assume there are a lot of regulators here. We are all regulators, we are friends, and we can be frank about ourselves. I think regulations in the industry in the West Africa sub-region has come a long way. And I'm very proud to see the work that's been done here in Ghana and in Nigeria and other parts of West Africa. And indeed, as I travel around most of Africa to do some work for ITU, I see that a lot of work has been done. But a lot more needs to be done. And I think you mentioned the consultative nature of the work that is being done in Nigeria, which I think is very good. We should step back a little bit and see what we have done in the past and how to move it forward. And we should intensify our consultations with these three main constituents: the public, the operators, and government. We should have the courage to advise the policymaker, the government, in certain directions that they may seek to go, which may not inure their benefits for the industry at the time. As a regulator, we may take some bashing for it, but we must have the courage to do that. You will get that information from your interactions with the regulator, the operators who have already invested in this industry. So don't treat them like pariah. Treat them like friends or your collaborators in how to advance the industry. For instance, the infrastructure on the ground. We talk about OTTs and all the neat applications that will move around. If the infrastructure is weak, how do you get the population to benefit from it? And who is maintaining the infrastructure? Who is expanding the infrastructure? The OTTs don't invest in infrastructure. It is the operators. The operators must be incentivized to keep on expanding and deepening the infrastructure. So that conversation must continue with the regulator is in the middle. You must talk to the operators, talk to consumers, advise government, so that we can together grow this sector. Because once it is thriving, it is the government or the whole population that will benefit. But we should not regulate in isolation and feel like as regulators we have all the answers. This is a good platform for us to exchange ideas. We must have similar platforms with the operators. We must have similar platforms with consumers and elicit their concerns. You are always the whipping boy. If you are a regulator, you must get used to it. People will bash you, but that is the thing that makes you unique. Take your inputs and advise the various constituents accordingly, and revise your licenses, revise the regulations. It's been more than 10 years, almost 15 years since we did some of these licenses. Take time, revise them, make them flexible, make them easy, and move on. Train the staff so they become knowledgeable about what is happening in the industry worldwide, not only in this little corner of ours. If we continue to do that, I think we will serve the regulatory community very well and serve our nation very well as well. And we shall be successful and be in the forefront of expanding the ICT sector. So I think regulators must remember they have these three major constituencies: the government, the public, and the operators, and we must keep that balancing act going and not neglect one against the other, also to speak. But again, this is a very good forum. I'd like to see more of this. Every quarter, if we have a platform where we can meet and exchange ideas, I think it will be very good. So thank you very much. This is just a comment. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the elaborate comment. I think it's taken in good faith. This is an area where we all need to work together, all the key players in the industry, from policymakers to consumers to operators and all that. We want to advance the field, and there's no way one sector can achieve that. We need to work together. So thanks for the agreed submission. Floor is still open. Any other views and questions, comments? I don't know how much time we have. What? 10. Okay. We have 10 minutes to wrap up this session. So if you have any contributions, I know that it's Mr. Scott around. You're supposed to make a submission on roaming, right?
I've been asked to.
Oh, okay. You ready to do that now? Okay, please. All right. We'll give him about 5 minutes to do that.
I think we all know the concept of being volunteered. And I'm more than happy to be volunteered to talk a little bit about roaming. I think in relation to roaming, I suppose just a little bit of background. My understanding is there are some moves here in ECOWAS and with WATRA to look at this particular issue. What has occurred from my perspective is we've now seen a number of groupings, obviously driven or following what's happened in Europe. We now have a whole range of different groupings globally putting together regional roaming, at least either packages or guidelines or frameworks as part of that process. They include the Caribbean, the GCC in the Gulf, Australia and New Zealand has a deal. We have something down in the Satra region in southern Africa, and there are more to come, I suppose, as part of that process. I've been involved in the ASEAN one, which has occurred, and we've seen negotiations between Malaysia and Singapore, Brunei, and a number of other markets. And currently, I'm also working on doing one for the Pacific. So I've been engaged in the last month by the ITU to look at this issue. I suppose the key question around roaming is when you look at Europe, you know, in a way, the roaming processes were very much a political exercise. One of the tangible benefits of being in a single European Union was to have lower roaming and telecommunications costs and to facilitate that focus of business. The issue here is, and I don't know the statistics, I'm sure other people do, about what real value could exist here in the ECOWAS or between particular markets, whether that's Ghana and Nigeria or Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, to look at roaming processes. So I suppose my issue around roaming is there's been some very traditional analysis that occurs, but I also think if you do look at roaming, we need to be very clear and break it up into about 3 or 4 different parts. The first part is whether you need to do something at the national level, and by that I mean things around bill shock, understanding what people are paying, so sort of truth in advertising or no fine print and all of those other issues, so that they're very clear about roaming packages. Secondly, it's very difficult to do things between countries, unlike Europe, all of Africa and all the other markets that I'm describing have sovereign rights, so it'll all be about bilaterals or an agreement as part of your membership of somewhere else. And then the other element of this, and if anyone wanted a copy, I'm more than happy to provide it. I think I made a comment, maybe I didn't make the comment, but I made the comment yesterday. If we look back in history, the WTO processes in 1996 have the very famous NGBT processes. They set a number of principles which still guide the NCA and most other regulators globally. Independent regulator, control of resources, separate licensing, ability to arbitrate, all of those other things. That's 20 years ago now. So what you see though is a real work on this in the Pacific or the Pacific Rim. And the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for the first time, I think globally, at least at a trade level, has started to build on those principles. So in 1996, there is no mention of mobile. There is no mention in 1996 of broadband. What the TPP has done, though, is build on those things. And in relation to roaming, it has created a most favoured nation clause, so that across any country that joins the TPP, which would include the US, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, I think New Zealand, and a number of other markets, have to offer the same roaming rate. So we'll start seeing roaming having this international aspect. Now, whether that then flows into other parts of the world, or whether the US and other countries then try and push it into more multilateral forum, I think is unclear yet, because the TPP is a bit of a political hot potato in the US as well. But all of those things, I think it's very worthwhile to have a look at that for you. I think the other element to think about when you do think about roaming is something that I think we spent a lot of time on this morning, OTTs. So the very traditional thinking about roaming being focused on voice, on SMS and data, there are a range of products and new technologies that maybe we need to seriously think about whether regulation is needed. And I think that gets back to having virtual SIMs, it gets back to having various applications on data that maybe the level of regulation that we need to have might be less because of those technical innovations. So it might be enough to, at a national level, have the right bill shock mechanisms rather than spending the time to try and create a intra-country regulatory structure. So my last couple of points to make is, in relation to this space, is sit down very early on and think what are the key objectives. Secondly, understand where you're at and where you want to be in terms of pricing and structures. Third, divide the national issues, bill shock, etc., and all the international issues. Fourthly, have a think about what implications for OTT, and are they doing your regulatory job for you, which is always a good thing. And then lastly, think about what are the costs and benefits of doing regulation. I know that if there's a political push for it, then maybe it's got to be done. And we saw that between Malaysia and Singapore, where, to be truthful in this forum, Singapore got a much better deal than Malaysia, because I think Singapore was very keen on setting up a very entrepot city for people and multinationals to go out and roam in the region. Had a very clear mandate. Malaysia ended up paying for that process. So that issue of making sure that there are costs and benefits from doing any not regulation, but having more exemplar frameworks in place is something to give some thought to. So I don't know whether that meets the volunteered request, but hopefully it does. As I said, I think it's a very good initiative broadly, but it might be an area where after doing a lot of research, you say there are better ways. Other ways, it might be creating a exemplar framework for people who do roam, that they're not subject to bill shock, they understand what their bills might be, and that it extends into the data world. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution. We'll allow one or two comments, contributions. We still have maybe about 5 minutes, right? 1 minute. Or 3, okay. Any comments? Questions? I see diminishing returns are setting.
All right, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Just to share a little experience of what we have in Nigeria with regards to roaming. When we started off with Discovered first, we had a challenge because our licenses say that roaming must be on a reciprocal basis. Now we had people who came in on board and wanted and were interested in roaming, but there were new entrants. So in that regard, there's no way that they can meet with a strict license requirement that roaming should be reciprocal, and our roaming is national. So what we've done recently is to come up with a consultation paper which spells out certain questions that we wanted to answer. And of course, it includes issues of pricing, issues of coverage, and what should be given in exchange. So at the moment, we're at the point where we've had a consultative forum, but we are looking at having an industry working group that will spell out the technical details, which we as a regulator don't want to impose on the industry. So we want the industry itself to consider some of the technical issues, pricing issues, and then get back to the regulator on what they think will be the way forward, and then we'll consider it and then come up with a final decision on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah. I would first of all want to state that our board chairman, Mr. Bafuboni, was very passionate about the TUI space technology when it started, and he's been very instrumental in pushing it to where it is now. And I would also like to state that the NCA has come a long way in the regulatory space, and I would like to urge my colleagues to continue working to push the industry forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I understand our time is up, so let me thank our two speakers for the brilliant contributions. Let me also thank you for your comments and questions and contributions. I think it's been a very, very interesting session. I've learned a lot myself, and hopefully we'll be able to take something back as we go to our various places. On this note, I think we are going to bring this session to a closure, and I will invite our chief. Thank you.
Thank you. We can do very well for them by putting our hands together. Thank you very much, moderator and your panelists. We are coming to the end of our 2 days of talking. Yeah, but hopefully with a lot of actions to follow. Yeah, sometimes there are things that our job as regulators is very, very important. Personally, I appreciate the importance of the job we do because it represents both risk and opportunity. There are decisions we make that pose risks to billion-dollar businesses, and decisions we make that open up opportunities for many. And if I look back to the many years when I remember there was a girl I liked to call, but I didn't have a telephone. So I had to be timing, so you can call me around this time. And I have to go and stand by a phone booth and make sure I'm on time so I can make the call. By the grace of God, I don't have to do that to call my wife these days. Yeah, so it is the decisions that people made, that has brought us to where we are now. So we want to thank the panel. We'll quickly want to rearrange the podium for the closing ceremony, and then we would bring our 2 days of deliberations to a close. Not everybody, even there are some people in the industry who don't appreciate that the span of activity.
All digital make Uganake. Kaka Mugana, and a digital.
It's a Ghana record digital. What is it?
International Telecommunication Union Ekune. Ever do man Ekune la Enuke. Baby analog na beho digital. Na kemo Ghana bukaza ha Ekune amuleti. Ombo Moderator ubeliza ha malane azo.
Imotike okayana malamazi ba wona ba ho aduru studio ne azo
San electro TV anaka set-top box a niake digital sakranian wonwore so wanwia biza ahmo electronic TV da na okuro elka mo digital sakranian o metala ye is a san electric TV da banko o mo matelo to digital set-top box mo digital sakrania no wo nwala ama esa ha frequency no amu apoti
nzo no vaso a wo juru so ade ye azwe
vaso mo zo ala ke wo tv ni anye baye kama boko mvunini ne one edendere ne baga akramagere sambre bobo a bon na kwa wugo ne no e ba ho ade ngane boko program information mo ozura ba ma wangu programs mo baga nzinla mo tito musu a ala ne tv bobo on de bia mo e ba jejeba only digital meke wo Ghana eke sa ekonde amane moba ma wangu kesi ebevi analog na wa ho digital a for National Communications Authority was 0302 776621 0302 771701 about wa ho website www.nca.org.gh la azo ana ekwafa email ebreye wo info@nca.org.gh no borasi Ministry of Communications on Digital Broadcasting Migration Committee ye ehabunwa mo efa agreba.
development, and how necessary it was for all stakeholders, and particularly for regulators, to be prepared to face the new challenges posed by technology, innovation in general. With regard to the session dealing with rural communications, there was no doubt that it convinced all participants on the need to make telecom ICT fully inclusive by improving accessibility and affordability for all citizens, and particularly those in rural and underserved areas in general. The third session showed how digitization has been changing the traditional telecom ICT landscape by allowing simple applications to challenge services initially devoted to voice. The fourth session emphasized the need for infrastructure sharing, showing their benefits, but with some concerns about the challenges that go along with it and which need to be addressed in advance. The fifth session highlighted the role that new actors such as OTTs are playing in the telecom ICT sector that needs to be taken into consideration by other stakeholders and mainly by regulators. Last but not least, the sixth and last session was on success stories, and it reminded that success worth being praised and best practices shared among all actors and disseminated. Overall, we can say that this two-day symposium was a good occasion for NCA to make an introspection of its achievements and envisage the future with serenity. It has also given a good opportunity to all attendees to share experience on technologies development, on their challenges, on how to address them. Be assured that ITU remains your partner and friend and shall continue to address the aforementioned topics with your support under a common platform where we can meet to discuss, share experience, and learn for a continuously performing and inclusive telecom ICT sector. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I would like to conclude my remarks by wishing NCA all the best for these 20 years of existence and express the wish that NCA's 50th anniversary celebration be more fruitful in terms of achievement, experience sharing for all sister regulatory bodies from Africa and beyond, though most of us present here will probably be retired at that time. I wish all foreign attendees a safe trip back home. I thank you for your kind attention, and I thank NCA for its continued and support and recognition of ITU. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's not on the program, but for the purpose of hearing some French, I would ask Mr. Lamino to make some brief remarks.
Bonjour tout le monde, ou du moins bonsoir pour ceux qui comprennent bien le français. Monsieur le Président du Conseil de régulation de la National Communication Authority de Ghana, Monsieur le Directeur général de NCA, Monsieur le représentant de la région Afrique de l'Ouest de l'IT, Monsieur le Directeur général adjoint, Mesdames et Messieurs les Directeurs généraux des autorités de régulation présents ici, Mesdames et Messieurs les Directeurs généraux des sociétés de télécommunications du Ghana, Mesdames et Messieurs les experts venus de l'extérieur, chers invités, c'est pour moi un grand plaisir de participer aux festivités de commémoration de 20 ans d'existence. 20 ans, vous me direz que c'est petit, certes, mais 20 ans, c'est un grand moment. En d'autres termes, pour une organisation comme la vôtre, Monsieur le Président, je dirais que c'est un âge d'or. Parce qu'en 20 ans, vous avez connu pas mal de staff, pas mal de personnels qui sont aujourd'hui peut-être à la retraite, qui ont marqué leur passage au niveau non seulement du comité du conseil de régulation, mais aussi au niveau du comité exécutif de la gestion de votre organisation. C'est dire combien le temps, l'âge aujourd'hui de la NCA peut être considéré comme un âge d'or, en ce sens que la NCA aujourd'hui est considérée comme un exemple, un modèle dans la sous-région. En effet, dès qu'on parle aujourd'hui de la portabilité des numéros en Afrique, même pas en Afrique de l'Ouest, en Afrique tout entière, le premier nom, le premier pays et la première organisation citée, c'est bien la NCA. Et je voudrais, mesdames et messieurs, chers participants, vous demander d'applaudir. Monsieur le Président, toutes mes félicitations pour un âge bien mérité. Monsieur le Président, tous nos remerciements surtout pour tout ce que vous apportez à la sous-région, pour tout ce que vous apportez à notre organisation sous-régionale Ouattara. Et mes remerciements vont également à tout le personnel de la NCA et au peuple ghanéen pour l'accueil ô combien plein de chaleur et l'hospitalité à Kwaba du Ghana. Merci beaucoup. Et j'aimerais bien, c'est vrai que je ne serai pas peut-être là, mais peut-être fêter les 100 ans de la NCA. Pourquoi pas? Je vous souhaite plein succès et plein de réussites pour les années à venir. Je vous remercie. Merci.
Merci, monsieur. I remember from my primary 6 French class, there was a teacher, he was from Benin actually. His name was Mr. Clou. And when he comes to class, he will count 1, 2, 3, you, au tableau. Conjuguer le verbe être. Then you start, je suis, tu es, il est. And when you make a mistake, he says, bring the duster. Then you do this. Say, if I miss, penalty. Okay, we'll get the last remarks from our board chairman. He has sat through continuously and actively engaged in every session. We want him to give the concluding remarks. And then but before he comes, just an announcement. A number of us have put down our names for the trip to Cape Coast tomorrow. The arrangement is for us to converge at the NCA Tower. The NCA Tower at the airport city. It is, I don't know, I said adjacent and somebody told me it is wrong. It is near Marina Mall. Yeah, because there's a road that separates, so they said it's not adjacent, but it is near the Marina Mall. However, if you would want, those of us from outside the country, if you would want a pickup from your hotel, please pass by the registration desk on your way out so that they would make a note. It looks like the arrangements for the past 2 days are not the same for tomorrow. So you will need to indicate if you want a pickup from your hotel. The convergent, the time to meet at the NCA Tower is 6 a.m. tomorrow because we want to beat the traffic so that you can return to Accra quite early during the day instead of coming back in the evening. And then session owners, NCA session owners, you are requested to wait behind after the closing ceremony. We'll now put our hands together and receive our board chairman, our world-class board chairman. Put your hands together.
Thank you. Edmond, I think you wanted to hear some French from the NCA side, right? Okay, let me say a few things. Premièrement, Monsieur Lamilou, je vous dis merci. À partir d'aujourd'hui, je vais vous donner l'assurance qu'il y a eu un nouvel chapitre qui était ouvert entre tous les régulateurs en Afrique, entre les régulateurs en Afrique et tous les fournisseurs de services de communication. En tout entier. Je voulais continuer en français, mais je vais changer en anglais. Let me say to all the West African, to our West African representative of ITU, director generals, commissioners, executives, and of various regulatory bodies, renowned speakers, the WATRA executive secretary, the board, management, and staff of NCA, distinguished guests from operators and service providers, partners of the press. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, good afternoon. And Edmond, once again, let me assure you that the last time I checked, NCA does not have any membership in NATO, which means no action, talk only. We deal with action all the time. So on behalf of the board, management, and staff of NCA, I would like to say once again, thank you for your participation in this historic event. I think all of us will agree to the fact that the contents of this symposium was very rich. The interaction was fantastic. So first of all, let us give a round of applause to our speakers. And I think we also will agree that it's been a very successful and insightful symposium. There's no question about that. And for the first time, NCA has been doing things differently. This symposium was being streamed live on YouTube and Facebook. So on that score, I would like also to give a big shout out to our consumer and corporate affairs staff. Now, this symposium also has raised the needed discussions and questions that will go a long way to enhance the partnerships and then the exchange of ideas on best practices across the globe in various countries on how actually we can utilize the tools of ICT to accelerate. And this part of our world, actually, even accelerating is not the right word, but to leapfrog some of the developments that we need to do to be able to be on the same platform like other advanced countries. And I truly believe that it can be done. The forum actually gave us the opportunity to discuss issues on how to improve infrastructure sharing, the rural connectivity, and the use of the Universal Service Fund. The discussions actually also gave us various perspectives from our service providers and the consumers also. Although I know there are quite a few of them here who actually didn't get a platform to express their opinions, but we get it from them all the time. And this actually creates the environment for us to have an effective collaboration. And just to cite what Dr. J said, by the way, let me throw in this joke when he said Dr. J. You guys might not be able to relate to it very well, but in the US, Dr. J, I live in Philadelphia, so if you say Dr. J, you're talking about a basketball player, right? So Dr. J, I wasn't sure what I'm supposed to take, the advice of Dr. J, the basketball player, or Dr. J, the professor. I think I'll go with the professor this time. Yeah, Dr. J actually told us to take some risk, which was to me, that was very critical. For those who have been following what NCA has been going through lately, we've taken quite a few risks. The NCA that you knew 4 years ago is not the same NCA. I mean, if you can be very frank about it. And on this call, I would like to give all the NCA staff a big round of applause. Because what we've done is, working together with the service providers, we need to actually help provide innovative products and services which are harnessed in such a way that, in one way or the other, either through the utilization of smart or light smart regulations, we can actually enhance our mission to regulate the communication industry in a forward-looking and transparent manner that promotes fair and sustainable competition, stimulates innovation, among others. Now, when you put together a group of academics and consultants and field practitioners, it's a very combustible, what they call an environment. So you typically come up with some actionable deliverables that need to be tracked. And as more of typically the consultants are very good in creating the deliverables for you, and then you just have to make sure that you execute. So basically what I'm trying to say is the major output that has come out of this symposium are 3 key deliverables. And one of them is actually the creation of a task force on the Internet of Things and big data to work with telcos, especially to leverage Vodafone's experience. We really need to be very proactive in this area, and that's something that NCA is going to facilitate. Now, secondly, taking a closer look at the MTM model or the OTTs. In this regard, the MNO's partnerships with the OTTs, that model that MTN shared with us is going to be tested. It's going to be tested, and it's going to be part of the collaboration for what the CTO is actually attempting to do as far as the survey that they want to conduct. So what we want to do is we're going to take the first shot, at this study by actually coming up with a model that can serve as an output to CTO's input. And it will be a uniquely Ghanaian model. And I'm very sure that CTO will be very proud, and the rest of the world will be very proud when we come up with that model. Now, it's going to be a model, basically, that will be a win-win. It will test the win-win-win proposition. It's going to be a win for the OTTs, it's going to be a win for the MNOs, and it's going to be a win for the government with respect to the taxation that's attached to the whole process. And also, there will be an undercurrent research value, research component. And I was discussing this with Dr. J, and I think at some point we might seek his guidance on how we're going to do this. Because anytime you get competitors in such an environment to collaborate, we need to find out exactly where the line of demarcation for the collaboration stops, and then the line of the real competition continues. Because guess what? As NCA, we are interested in both. We are interested in both. So there's going to be a research value, that will be attached to this, to this study. Now, the third one is, which actually we've already started. From the NCA standpoint, we have a technical team that's actually putting together the template for the national roaming. So that's going to be the next exercise, the third exercise actually, that we're going to be working on. Let me make a comment on the OTTs actually. I'm sure most of you know about Professor Peter Darkwa. In the 90s, he was one of the greatest philosophers in management, innovation. And he wrote a book. I think it's the title, I believe, is Entrepreneurship and Innovation. He talked about creative imitation. All right? He talked about creative imitation. And if you think about it, the concept is still applicable now. Why is it still applicable now? It's still applicable now because today is Skype, tomorrow is going to be something else. So philosophically and fundamentally, these guys are here to stay, and they might morph into something different. By the way, I'm hoping that the next round of innovation and along these lines will come. There will be a company from Ghana called Aquaba. That Google might be. Oh, this is a very funny joke, right, guys? All right, guys. So I think we've all had enough today. So on behalf of His Excellency, the John Dramani Mahama, our President, our Sector Minister, Dr. Omani Boama, the Board and Management of NCA, I would like to say thank you for your participation And there are more things to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, bilingual, world-class chairman. Shall we please be on our feet? We'll say a prayer, and then we would disperse. Please, we are reminded, those who are traveling to Cape Coast tomorrow, those who are not, if you don't indicate your hotel for a pickup, then please make sure you are at the NCA Tower by 6 a.m. tomorrow. Because we want to beat the traffic. Yeah, it's important. I don't know, it's Ghana, it's international time. It's not Ghana time. Shall we please bow down our heads in prayer? Our Heavenly Father, we thank you. This is your word, that the end of a matter is better than the beginning. We thank you for leading us through all these constructive engagements. All the ideas that have popped up in our minds that we intend to work on variously in our organizations. Guide us. May they evolve into concrete actions that will impact the people we serve. And grant safety to everybody. Safety in the air, safety upon the waters, upon the rails, on the footpaths, and on the roads. May we all arrive safely at our various destinations. In Jesus' name have we prayed. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for coming.
Osei. Ghana, my name is Calibos, the only boss with one S. Bam. There's an exciting news. Ghana is migrating from analog to digital. Did you hear me? Digital. Ghana, the brutal. Me, Calibos, I'm excited about this news. What about you?
Digitime in Ghana.
Digital. It's digital. We are going digital. It's digital. Your television will never be the same. We are going digital.
Osei. Ghana, my name is Calibos, the only boss with one S. Bam. There's an exciting news. Ghana is migrating from analog to digital. Did you hear me? Digital. Ghana, the brutal. Me, Calibos, I'm excited about this news. What about you?
Digitime in Ghana.
Digital. It's digital. We are going digital. It's digital.
This is brought to you by Ministry of Communications, Digital Broadcasting Migration Committee, and National Communications Authority.
Ago Ghana this year. Michiamu ya Jimia Henewa. Media Seminam. Anything. Eye wiase kubata ya ehwe television semso a ye twa ne tiawa fra won ITU. E de aba. Se enam nsakraya e ba won nwuma mu nti. Etwa se wiase nyina sesem ekọ ne obroni friend digital television. Sanses aye. E de mfasodie bebre enenam. Enam dodo nsen kwanti. Ebema television stations adoso a ni nyina nso ubenya no kwa a wonsipo ana wonti ahwe imprempren ya me ne wo kasai se wo digital television so wo Ghana ha unya channels be ye duo no ene ekire television stations yi do so nso no na wo akensie eboa ama wo atumi asom ye yen hye ne nso se sansesa ye ebema nyuma bebre aba ama Ghana de hye enya bia ye Ghana this year, Omayan she Sani enso. Etwa se osisa wu television dada no na okoto digital de. Nemu wo yesa no hwe yie obi am phone fufuo ana na okwaye enye TV tia nyina na ye digital hwehwe sa digital Ghana ahyensodie yi ewo television bia ho ansa na wato emu se wo TV adaka no wontumi nsisa ne mprempren a nyabotre men ka asem bi nkirewo ewo se wonya sa adaka bɛyɛ a obroni fra ne set-top box na tumi aboa wo am wanya digital channels ofra me na asase omama ko agya bi wo fa ase me de ma ye krado nti Ghana fo nyina mo mmeka me ho na ye nko digital.
Digitime in Ghana.
Digital. It's digital. We are going digital.